Hello. For several years now, I believed my house was haunted. Not properly haunted, not The Exorcist haunted. Nobody was crawling backwards down the stairs, no Latin appeared on the bathroom mirror, no furniture moved itself unless you count the odd chair collapsing under the strain of modern life. It was a quieter sort of haunting, a more passive-aggressive kind of haunting, where the house doesn't throw plates at you, it just makes the bed sheets feel clammy, fogs the mirrors, sticks the doors, and fills every room with the emotional atmosphere of a damp sock behind a radiator in February. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt wrong, heavy. The air had texture, presence. The sort of cold that bypasses jumpers, thermal vests, dignity and goes straight to your bones, where it sits down and starts muttering. I am, for the record, a rational person, and I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in physics, bad plumbing, inadequate ventilation, and the innate British capacity to ignore all three until something rots or becomes a Channel 5 documentary. But I began to wonder, because that's what houses do when they go wrong. They don't just fail, they assume a mood. Now, there are places that feel cheerful, places that feel calm, and there are places that feel expensive, which is a separate emotion composed mainly of fear and polished stone. And then there are places that feel quietly as if they're disapproving of you. My house had become one of those. The mirrors fogged, the floorboards sighed, the doors stuck in their frames and then released themselves with a little wooden complaint. The windows collected condensation like they were hoarding evidence. The bed felt as if it had become perpetually clammy, like it had been pre-loved by an amphibian. The rooms had that strange thick quality that old houses get, not exactly cold, not exactly wet, more like the air has been lightly used by someone else and returned without the receipt. Naturally, I assumed this was all in my mind. My partner had left. The house was full of emotional ghosts. Empty rooms tend to echo. That's their hobby. A room that used to contain two people now contains one, and it doesn't become immediately neutral. It becomes theatrical. Chairs accuse you. The kettle sounds too loud. The landing has opinions. So I thought, well, this is just grief. Perhaps this is memory. Perhaps this is the house holding on to things which was true in a sense. It was holding on to approximately 4 litres of water a day. Enter paranormal investigation, which is funny. Television spent years telling us to believe the proper way to investigate a haunting is to walk around in the dark with a torch under your chin and a lot of unnecessary equipment. You need an EMF meter, you need night vision, you need a thermal camera, you need a spirit box making noises like a broken taxi radio, and you need 3 men in hoodies whispering, "Did you hear that?" every time an old building behaves like an old building. A pipe knocks, "Did you hear that?" A floorboard creaks, "Did you hear that?" A pigeon shifts in a roof space, "Something is trying to communicate." "No, Derek, it's a pigeon." There's always a moment in these programs where someone asks the room a question, "Is there anybody here with us?" And then everybody stands still, listening to a Victorian terrace cool down. And if there's a click, a drip, a scrape, or the faint sound of a producer losing the will to live, that becomes evidence. A ghost apparently never says anything useful. It never says, "The damp course has failed." It never says, "Your external wall is cold and your ventilation strategy is frankly medieval." It never says, "Buy a hygrometer, you theatrical idiot," which is a shame because it would have helped. Instead, the dead seem mostly interested in making torches flicker and knocking once for yes and twice for no, and 3 times for "Please renew the boiler service agreement." Anyway, then a friend visited. They stood in the house, sniffed the air and said with the kind of blunt confidence only visitors possess, "It's 75% humidity in here." 75%? I didn't even know humidity had numbers indoors. I thought humidity was something that happened in rainforests, Florida, and the BBC weather maps where someone in a sensible jacket is pointing at Cornwall. But apparently not. Apparently humidity can live in your hallway. Apparently you could be sitting there wondering whether the house contains the tormented spirit of a former residence, when in fact you're simply living inside a badly ventilated sponge. This is the problem with the supernatural. It has style. Damp only has moisture. The ghost hadn't come from beyond the veil. The ghost had come from the air. or more precisely, from the quantity of water suspended in the air, waiting to make everything colder, heavier, sadder, and more inclined to grow things in corners. I didn't need a medium. I needed a dehumidifier. So I bought one, a small white box. £132, which isn't nothing, but it's still cheaper than an exorcist and doesn't involve chanting. I plugged it in. It hummed, not dramatically, not like a machinery in a science fiction film. It hummed like an introverted washing machine with a modest administrative role in the afterlife. It wasn't impressive, it didn't glow. It didn't promise transformation, it simply sat there quietly swallowing the house. So I went to bed. Next morning I looked at the tank. 2 litres, 2 litres of water from the air inside my house. That's a bottle of Evian, but sinister. It's one thing to know your house is damp in an abstract way. It's another thing to pour your atmosphere down the sink, because that's what I was doing. I wasn't emptying a machine, I was disposing of the haunting 2 litres of ghost water. And suddenly the whole thing became absurdly obvious. The house wasn't possessed, it was wet. The spectre was moisture. The afterlife was condensation with ambition. I named the dehumidifier Jeff. Jeff doesn't ask difficult questions. Jeff doesn't say, "How are you coping?" Jeff doesn't leave. Jeff just sits in the hallway and drinks the house dry, turning dread into measurable units. It's not love exactly, but it is reliable, which is sometimes better. Here's something no one tells you. A damp house doesn't merely make you uncomfortable, it alters the atmosphere in the old, literal sense of the word. It changes the air around you, changes how sound behaves, it changes how smell lingers, changes how warmth sits in a room, and it changes how your body reads the space. And because your body's not a philosophical instrument, it doesn't say, "Ah yes, I am detected elevated indoor humidity and a cold external wall and insufficient air movement." It says something is wrong. And once your body decides something is wrong, the brain starts looking for a story. Brains love stories. They're terrible for this. Give the brain a creak, a smell, a cold patch, a dark hallway, a half-remembered grief, and a house that sighs at night, and it will immediately start work on a screenplay. The supernatural is mostly bad evidence with a dramatic lighting plan. A pipe expands, a door sticks, a floorboard moves, a window rattles, and the nervous system, being an excitable little committee, raises its hand and says, "Could be ghosts." No, nervous system, it's just January. A more interesting question isn't whether ghosts exist. They don't, obviously. Sorry, paranormal investigators. The interesting question is why bad buildings feel haunted. Because they do. The problem with a bad home is that you can't simply walk away from it. You live inside the condition. It becomes your weather. It shapes your sleep, your mood, your patience, your body. A damp house isn't just a building with a moisture problem. It's an environment that keeps misinforming the nervous system. It tells you you're cold when the thermostat says you shouldn't be. It tells you the bedding is unclean when it's just been washed. It tells you the air is heavy, the room is hostile, the corners are suspicious, and the wallpaper may be developing a political position. After a while, you stop trusting your own perception. You think, am I cold? Am I ill? Am I miserable? Am I haunted? No. You're living in a material condition that has been translated into feeling. This is what buildings do. They turn physics into mood. There's something rather British about all this. We live in a country where people will sit in a cold, damp house wearing 2 jumpers and fingerless gloves, insisting everything is fine because putting the heating on feels financially reckless and morally suspicious. We've done our best to turn discomfort into character. If a room is freezing, we say it's bracing. If there's mould, we say the house needs airing. If a window is streaming with condensation, we blame the person breathing near it. There's a whole national mythology built around endurance. Cold house? Put on a jumper. Damp wall? Open a window. Black mould? Try not to look weak in front of the spores. But it's also true that many homes are simply poor at being homes. They were built for a different age, adapted badly for another, patched with hope, plastic paint and expanding foam. That usual British optimism that if you ignore a problem long enough, it becomes heritage. Then when people get ill, tired, depressed or irritable, we individualise it. We tell them to manage themselves better. Open a window, but not too long because the heating bill is already doing unspeakable things in the corner. Meanwhile, the house itself is shaping the day. The structure is part of the psychology. And this is the bit I think we miss. We talk about mental health like it occurs inside a sealed human unit, each of us privately malfunctioning in our own bespoke little skull. But people live somewhere, and if that somewhere is cold, damp, dark, expensive, badly ventilated, or quietly rotting behind the wardrobe, then the person isn't the only thing requiring attention. Perhaps the house is part of the symptom. Once Jeff entered my life, things changed. Not instantly, there was no flash of light, no priest falling backwards off the sideboard, just a steady bureaucratic miracle of water leaving the air. 2 litres, then 2 more, then another. The dehumidifier filled its tank twice a day. I emptied it reverently. Holy water from the underworld. The humidity came down from somewhere around 75% to something closer to 50%. And the house changed personality. The air became lighter. The bedding stopped trying to mate with my skin. The room held warmth. The mirrors behaved. The floorboards still sighed, but with a less accusatory register. I slept better, my joints complained less, and my temper became less biblical. Even the boiler seemed less like an enemy combatant. This is the strange thing. Nothing dramatic happened, no great refurbishment took place. I didn't transform my life, optimise my routine, cleanse my aura, find myself journaling gratitude, or paying someone called Willow £90 to align the emotional frequency of the landing. I removed water from the air, and my life improved, which is annoying, frankly. One likes one's suffering to be more profound than relative humidity, but there it is. Sometimes despair is atmospheric. Sometimes the abyss has a condensation problem. I should be clear. The house was not only damp, there were real ghosts in it too. Not supernatural ones, memory ghosts. The kind you create by living somewhere. The version of yourself who moved in, the version who thought things would go a certain way. The conversations that happened in one room and not another. The shape of life that changes and then leaves its furniture behind. When my partner left, the house did become haunted, in the ordinary human sense. Rooms remembered things. That's not paranormal, that's what memory does when it has walls to attach itself to. But the damp made it worse. It gave grief an atmosphere. It gave sadness a smell. It made loneliness physical. Which is why we invent stories. Ghosts are often stories we tell when the room feels bad and we don't yet know why. So here's my advice. Before you light sage, consult a medium, or invite 3 men called Kev into your hallway with an infrared camera and emotional problems, buy a hygrometer. It's less dramatic, it won't get you a Netflix series, but it might tell you something useful. If your house feels haunted, check the humidity. Check whether warm, moist air is meeting cold surfaces and throwing a tiny domestic seance on the plaster. The difference between I sense a presence and this room is unhealthy may be a plastic box with a number on it. And that to me is both funny and bleak. We love dramatic explanations, we love ghosts, we love signs, we love the idea that the universe is whispering to us. We're less keen on the idea that the wall is cold, the air is damp, the house is underventilated and the skirting board has become a botanical experiment. Physics is a terrible storyteller. Has no music, got no candlelight, no mysterious woman in black at the top of the stairs, just a measurement. 75% humidity. So here we have it. This is my bottle of ghosts. I don't know how many ghosts are in 2 litres, but there they are. The thing is, my house wasn't haunted, it was damp. But I also think that explains more than it dismisses, because a haunted house is often just a house that stopped protecting you properly. It's a building that lets the outside in. We mistake physics for metaphysics because moisture is harder to dramatise. But damp has consequences. It changes the room changes the body, and the body changes the story. And before you know it, you're standing on the landing at midnight listening to a radiator gurgle and wondering if the dead are trying to reach you through the central heating. They're not. Probably. It's just Jeff working in the hallway.